a special episode of the Bum Rush, an episode we are calling Performance Bonus because it's bonus content, and we are calling it because it is about the financials of the UFC, more specifically the UFC ESPN deal and how it affects fighters and the promotion moving forward. I will discuss all of this with a man who is certainly qualified to have this discussion, a writer for MMA Payout and the co-host of Show Money, the Darren Ravel of MMA, the great Jason Cruz. Jason, how are you?
I'm good, but we got to change that because Darren Ravel works for a gambling company now. He's not doing sports business per se.
That's right. So who's his sort of?
We have I would. You know what? I would rather be the Arash Markavi of MMA. You know.
There we go. I like that.
He's at every party. He's doing every gig, everything Hollywood, taking pictures with fine ladies on his Instagram. If you follow.
So now you know what happens. This has opened the door for someone to be the Jason Cruz of basketball, the Jason Cruz of baseball. Since Darren Ravel, it got too hot in the kitchen for him and he left. Now someone has to, now you get to be the guy.
Well, I could be the Jason Cruz of Jason Cruz.
There you go. All right, let's talk about the UFC ESPN deal, Jason.
Okay.
So when I initially heard about this, I want to talk about how it struck me because initially they said, well, there's going to be only pay-per-views through ESPN now and ESPN Plus, but they're still going to do cards. So the first thing that popped in my head was HBO boxing and HBO pay-per-view, how they would broadcast certain, and obviously, ESPN Plus is sort of an OTT. HBO was kind of a subscription-based model, but there was fights that were on HBO boxing, and then there were fights that were big, so big they had to be on HBO pay-per-view. They weren't just going to give them to you. So I kind of view that the same way. Let's talk about this 500,000 buy thing because there's a lot of, or 500,000 views or however you want to talk about, whatever would have been pay-per-view buys before. From my understanding, part of the UFC ESPN deal, and we talked about this briefly before the podcast, is that a lot of these figures aren't available. Obviously, these are contracts the two parties signed, and there's things that are just not known to us we could speculate on. So when I heard the 5,000 view thing, that every pay-per-view was going to be treated like it made 500,000 views, that's strictly to determine what ESPN would pay the UFC, right? Like we're going to pay you based on all of these doing 500,000 views.
Well, let's back up for a sec here. I think that we should first discuss how this is going to play out with pay-per-view and ESPN Plus. Essentially, from what we know, the UFC is going to get a license fee for allowing ESPN Plus to have the exclusive pay-per-view rights in North America for UFC pay-per-views. They'll get a license fee up front. So no matter how well or how bad the pay-per-view will do, they get a certain payout there, and they will get a back-end payout from how the pay-per-view does in terms of purchases. So just to back up one more time, it's the pay-per-views now are down to $59.99 for this Saturday, whereas what were they, $64.99 for your local cable and satellite provider. But yeah, so as far as how where that 500,000 was it 500,000 buys, which you're discussing? Is that right, John?
Yeah, so is that based on the licensing fee? Is that where they're setting that number at? No matter, because you said no matter how well or how poorly.
No. So they're getting paid out. So so when you talk about the 500,000 buys, I think you have to kind of determine what how's that going to be addressed. So like I said, UFC is going to get paid out the license fee. So that's regardless of what the buys do. So we're not even at the 500,000 buys you're talking about.
Okay.
So they're getting paid out there. They're going to get paid out on the back end. Now, how much will they get paid out? Maybe is dependent upon those pay-per-view buys that happen. One thing we need to also insert here is the fact that there are reports, and I think that's reported by a couple places, but there will be dynamic pricing. So basically what dynamic pricing is based on how good the pay-per-view is or how mediocre the pay-per-view is, the price will go up or down. So for instance, Conor Khabib 2 comes up, if it happens, if it happens this fall, don't expect the $59.99 price on ESPN Plus. Expect it to be jacked to maybe $99.99. And then maybe later on you'll get a not the best pay-per-view in the fall, and instead of $59.99, maybe they'll do a special $49.99, something like that. So just from that outset, you also have to calibrate the revenue on those the dynamic pricing basis. Now back to your 500,000. So let's talk about like this Saturday. Let's say for just an example, the great ESPN does great, the UFC does great this weekend and sells 600,000 buys. Probably not going to happen, but let's just say 600,000. That would be over your 500,000 pay-per-view threshold that you threw out there, right? Mm-hmm. So the question then is, how much of that extra, or 100,000 pay-per-view buys, that revenue, where does it go? And so the question is, does ESPN get more? Does UFC get more? Is it a split? Is that kind of tee up the question?
Well, you understand what the 500,000 is the number that the UFC set, right? UFC and ESPN set.
Yeah.
So, and really, here's the larger question, because I want to sort of push this in the direction of really why I wanted to have a podcast and really give this some clarity. Now, I'm going to bring somebody into the discussion here, Jason. And the person I'm bringing to the discussion is Brendan Schaub. Now, people think whatever they want to think about Brendan Schaub, either that he's plugged in and knows things that some others don't because of his relationship with Joe Rogan. Some people think sometimes he's way off base on certain things. But he has a huge audience. Mm-hmm. And he went on his show and sort of looked at it in this way. So I'm going to read you his comments, and then we'll kind of enter that into discussion to determine what sort of prompted me to want to have this discussion.
Okay.
All right, so what he said was, the power has left the fighters, all the fighters. And this is based on a transcript from bjpenn.com. Schaub said on his Below the Belt podcast, because now that they have this guaranteed nut, meaning the UFC, they're covered, they're balling. There's no more pay-per-view stars. The pay-per-view star model is over. It was a business model that was predicated on huge pay-per-view stars: Brock Lesnar, Ronda Rousey, obviously Conor McGregor, Anderson Silva, these guys, these bigger-than-life names, and they put all the resources into them, and they had a marketing machine behind them. You're never going to see that anymore. That's over with. So if you don't think your fighter got huge kind of push before, it's going to get way worse. They don't have to. They're set. They're in cruise control in America. They just went cruise control. We don't have to bank on stars. Now that they're sitting pretty, they have this guaranteed money. They don't have to make stars. You're just going to get fights now. Good fights, great fights, that's all you're going to get. That's Brendan Schaub speaking again on Below the Belt podcast. Now, when I heard that, it almost seemed like Schaub was saying there's no incentive for either the UFC or ESPN to make money. And there's no incentive for them to have these pay-per-views draw more. And that seemed a little short-sighted to me. Does that – the UFC and particularly ESPN still care about pay-per-view stars, right? They still want Conor McGregor on a pay-per-view. They still want Israel Adesanya to be the next big guy, right? This 500,000 buys doesn't change that.
Yeah, that doesn't make – whatever Brendan Schaub said, hopefully that was taken out of context, because that doesn't make sense at all. Here's the thing.
No, it was fully in context, Jason.
No, yeah, that's what I'm saying. It doesn't make sense. I disagree with what he's saying, because –
So tell me why.
He's what the premise is there is that they've made their money. They don't want to make more money. Whereas we know the UFC wants to make more money. Even if they're guaranteed money, you could make more money, right? By building stars, by marketing, all this stuff. Why do we have all this shoulder programming, all these shoulder stories about fighters? The ESPN is doing much more in terms of marketing their athletes through news stories. that's the thing. I mean, I don't know. You're not going to have publicity stunts, but you are going to have strategic marketing of certain stars, and they do want. I mean, in order for the product to continue and grow, they'll need to keep building more stars. Israel Adesanya is a great example of someone that they want to build. They want him in featured fights. You know, they want up and coming fighters. I mean, they need people. They need to continue to grow this product. They need to keep finding new fighters to market. And so for Brendan Schaub to just say, well, hey, they've made their money. They don't need to do anything more. Seems a little, like you said, short-sighted.
And I think that maybe what he's doing here, and I don't want to speak for Brendan Schaub, but it seems like he's sort of taking this model and putting it against the NFL, meaning the NFL has a TV deal, so they don't put like playoff games on pay-per-view or something, or they don't try and necessarily build their stars in the sense that they have a schedule, and whoever's on the schedule, that's who's playing. They're not trying to match people up necessarily, but I do think they're trying to market. What I heard you kind of saying there that I think Schaub is missing here is the money has to go somewhere, right, Jason? So if a pay-per-view makes 1.8 million buys, either ESPN's getting that money or UFC's getting that money, and if ESPN happens to be getting more of it, the more the money they make, the more UFC will get, even if they're in the lesser of the split. So let's talk about what is the goal of, if we give Schaub's comments even the littlest bit of credit, what is ESPN looking for? And this is the part that really threw me off on his comments. Like, ESPN understands rivalries, right? They have rivalry week in basketball. They're looking to pit people against each other. They're looking to create stories. So do you think what we know of the ESPN business model, what is their incentive to – do you think that it was just setting a number, like they set the 500,000 views because, like, well, it has to be something, so they probably looked at it, averaged out all the pay-per-views in the last couple of years, and maybe it came out to 500,000 views. That was the number they set, and that was that. Like, moving forward, what – other than making money, which probably is the ultimate incentive, how are they going to play this game? Are they going to be doing some of the shoulder programming like they've been doing? Are they going to be trying to build are they going to get into all the muck?
Well, I think here's what we could kind of grasp so far in the 4 months the ESPN UFC partnership has gone on. First of all, ESPN Plus partnered up with the UFC because they believed a couple things. I mean, notably that they had a demographic that they could pull. They have a younger UFC has arguably a younger demographic with disposable income that they wanted to attract. Secondly, and maybe firstly, they needed content for the new digital platform. That's what they were really out there for. That's what the big thing was for ESPN Plus, to fill their OTT platform. And they what we can tell is that they've delivered, right? Why do we know this? Because they've already wanted the exclusive rights for the UFC. For the UFC pay-per-views. So that's what you get. So the end game, I guess you could what you gather from ESPN, of course, one, make money. Two, is to build an audience, build content for their subscribers for this OTT that has grown exponentially since it started last spring. So, I mean, I think that in itself is what they expect in at least the short term of their deal.
And a quick jumping off point here is I think one thing that's sort of being missed in all this that I haven't heard a lot of talk about is DAZN. And here's why I bring up DAZN. There's a lot of things that are connected with DAZN that had DAZN really put themselves in a position to get the UFC rights, that's a game changer for the whole situation. So ESPN, while I'm sure they're happy to have the UFC, I mean, they sort of stayed away from the UFC for a very long time, and we're doing just fine without them. So I think it's a little bit of a game of keep away, Jason, in the sense that the person that runs the zone is John Skipper. Well, John Skipper used to be the head of content for ESPN, so he knows how to build an empire on content, right? So he's buying up rights, he's buying up Canelo Alvarez, and obviously you would handle boxing differently than mixed martial arts because there are not promotions necessarily. There kind of are, but it's better to get stars. So you got Canelo, you got Triple G, you got Anthony Joshua, and he's working on Deontay Wilder. May not get him, but I think that had the zone put themselves in a position to get the UFC, and then they did what UFC's doing now, where the only way you could get UFC pay-per-views was to have the zone, that changes everything. So I think that the UFC is definitely in the MMA business. Clearly, they're definitely in the UFC business. Obviously, they're more so in the MMA business because of the PFL as well. But I think that the zone is a factor in this whole decision-making process.
Well, I think that there's two things. One, I think that the UFC contracts with the cable and satellite providers ended in 2018, whereas the zone was going to launch in the fall of 2018. So maybe timing is one thing that was an issue. Second thing is that they had committed. I believe they had committed to Bellator a while back. So I don't know, maybe that if there were discussions with the UFC, but I don't know if there was a commitment to Bellator. Now they have Combates America on the zone as well. But I don't know if the zone was already aiming toward the fact that they already had a boxing base overseas as well. That might be those might be some factors. Was UFC on the radar for the zone? Maybe. I don't know. I mean, there was always talk that maybe Turner was in play as well, and that could have been with their BR app that they could have had them on. But who knows if the UFC was even thinking about that, or they were looking for bigger fish, in terms of they wanted maybe a ESPN or re-up with Fox or something else like that. But we don't know if the broadness of the zone was to the liking of the UFC.
Okay, so before we get back to Schaub and a little bit of the particulars, what do you think about the ESPN UFC deal so far? I mean, most people seem pleased with the product, Jason. They like the pace. They like. I told someone that I believed that part of the allure of them being on ESPN for me is that ESPN loves getting stuff done before SportsCenter, and on the East Coast, I've noticed that they're trying to get their pace going to where things would sort of drift a little bit later on Fox, but ESPN, they want that main event to be on SportsCenter. That's just kind of how they operate. So what do you think of the product so far?
Production is great. Megan Oliva with those inset promos before the person walks out is great. I think that's great. I think that like you said, the pacing is great. Everybody loves the time. My God. I mean, everyone loves the time so much. I wish they did a late night show just because everyone's so goddamn happy about it. But okay. So the one thing that, I really have a criticism about is their interface on ESPN Plus really is terrible if you are late to a card. So what I'm trying to say is, if you missed the prelims and you want to scroll back to see the prelims, it's not intuitive for you to find it. I'm not the biggest tech guy, so I need blinking lights telling me, hey, here's the fight, here's the fight, here's the fight, here's the fight. Also main event, you get, if like say you're out and then you come back at late at night, you want to watch the whole you want to watch one fight because you hear it's the fight at night. But if you just miss it immediately and like you want to watch just the one fight, you can't, because you got a whole block of 3-hour main card that you have to sift through. That's another problem. I mean, what I would love to see is the interface how UFC Fight Pass does theirs, where you can immediately go straight to a card. It has those little toggles at the bottom of your screen where you could see, here's the knockdown, here's the submission, here, that kind of stuff, where you could go right to it. That would be great. So that's my little criticism, but I'm like with everybody else. I like the pacing. I like how the production of it goes. I love the broadcast teams. Paul Felder, more Paul Felder whenever he's not fighting. He's great. So yeah, I'm bullish on ESPN Plus and the UFC deal.
I don't know how you consume it. Do you consume it on a PC or a laptop or what?
So here's the other thing. I like watching it on a PC. It's a little harder on an app. It's what's funny is it's easier to watch it on my phone than it is on like an iPad. That's what I've found. So I don't have to, if I'm in in the city, I don't have problems with any streaming issues or anything like that. I could just pick it up on a phone and I could start watching it. It's much faster than UFC Fight Pass used to be. I'll say it for that. But the iPad interface, I don't know. I'm having issues with.
Here's where I think would be a perfect sort of synergy of two things. I watch it on my Apple TV.
Oh, okay.
And I think that, for me, ESPN Plus, because if you go to the ESPN app on Apple TV, you can just sort of scroll over to the ESPN Plus. So I think whatever guy over at ESPN comes up with the idea of like, hey, if you buy an Apple TV, you get 6 months free of ESPN Plus, they're going to sell 1 million Apple TVs, because it's just – for me, it works as an interface. All right, let's step back to Schaub for a second, because I want to ask you, do you think this new ESPN deal in any way, because I just want to put some closure to this whole, because when he said it, it just threw me for a loop, and obviously you disagree with it, but I don't know that he's always completely in tune, but he's kind of, sometimes he's near it. Do you think this in any way changes the marketing of fighters? Do you think it in any way changes the onus of the UFC to promote them versus ESPN promoting them? Does either entity have more of a incentive to promote them? I mean, what does this in any way change the way that fighters get fights now? Meaning, are we going from, because I think the larger theme of what Schaub was saying is we're going from what everybody complains about, which is entertainment-based fights being made, to more purist fights being made. I don't agree with that. I'm wondering if you do, and how would the ESPN UFC deal? I mean, do you think he's, obviously we've already stated.
I don't think it would. It's always going to be entertainment based. I think it's going to be on who is most entertaining decided by the fans. Who has the more entertaining fight style? Are you a guy that's a ground and pound, or you're knocking it out? Do you have flashy kicks? Those are overwhelmingly more popular than the guy who grabs you and has you holds you down on the ground for 5 minutes a round. That's easy to conclude. As far as marketing of fighters, I think it's kind of the same. I think that ESPN UFC, with fights coming up, they want people to know these people's stories. And so it's easy when you have a partner as ESPN, because you got a guy, you just send Brett Okamoto or someone else out to cover a guy's background story, and you have a good little story. You could have it on the ESPN car wash. You could have athletes come in for interviews on ESPN, those types of things. I mean, those are easy. I think one thing to keep on the back of your head, of course, is the question we should ask is, does this mean out of the cage dollars for athletes? So what I'm trying to get at is, will Macy Barber be able to get a local sponsorship outside of the cage because she's on ESPN? Will so-and-so get his damn CBD deal because he was fighting on ESPN? All these things. When every other fighter on Ariel Helwani talks about a CBD deal, how much other ancillary dollars can a fighter obtain because of the ESPN deal? It will be interesting to see compared to when they were on Fox.
One thing I think that I'm interested to find out as well, and I do think Schaub makes an interesting point. I think he made it kind of accidentally. And this is what I mean by that. There are things that I'm noticing since this ESPN deal has happened that are things that ESPN is putting their flavor on this. And there's certain things that typical sports fans like to see. And ESPN has put a little bit of that into the production. Here's what I mean. Trevor Whitman being a coach, speaking in between rounds is what sports fans, like typical, not MMA fans, sports fans like to hear from coaches, right? They like to have someone explain to them, because what are most studio analysts, former players, former coaches. So Whitman is that thing that's so obvious. Like, here's a guy who is a coach. He's in corners. He's going to tell you what it is that they mean. And listen, Jason, not for nothing, but the whole Sunday Morning Cornerman idea that I came up with was supposed to originally be me talking to coaches every Sunday after fights, getting their perspective and me asking them questions like, hey, what would you have done in this situation? It's kind of what ESPN's doing. And that's not, to humble brag. It's me just explaining myself. But the other thing is, I think that the traditional sports fan likes rankings. If I turn a basketball game on and I know nothing about the two teams, if I find out it's number 3 against number 7, I might watch the game a little bit longer. If I know Maryland's playing UC Santa Barbara, and I'm like, I haven't watched college basketball in 5 years, and Maryland's ranked 3rd and UC Santa Barbara's ranked 7th, I might stick with it. So I think that when Schaub says we might be moving away from an entertainment-based model, I don't 100% agree with him. I'm with you. Fighting will always be entertainment-based. I do think ESPN is going to put a focus on certain things that traditional sports fans like that may move us a little bit away from it, but I don't know that's the point that he was making. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just don't think Brendan Schaub was making sense from based on the quote, just to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think that is, what do you say, a really dumb take just to get people to talk about it. Yeah. Because, I mean, yeah, that's what I would say if that was his take, because it's always entertainment based. Why? Because you're on TV. I mean, it's always going to be entertainment. Oh, I wanted to say one more thing, just really quick, going back to whether I like the critiquing the ESPN deal. One thing that I do miss is the ceremonial weigh-ins. I don't know where to see them anymore. I am, by habit, always turning to FS1 on Friday afternoons, waiting for the weigh-ins. It's not there anymore. So, I mean, where do you find it? And so, yeah, it's that's the one of those things that I do miss. But getting back to Schaub, I'm not sure where the take is. I'd like to know what the evidence would be, and what he's talking about. But just from that take, I mean, I don't want to be too hard on it, but yeah, it's really bad.
No, I know what you're saying. I think that he kind of applied it to, but like you said, anytime your theory is we've made money so we don't want to make more, it doesn't really hold a lot of water. No. It's almost like he's saying, because I get paid a salary, I have no incentive to work more hours.
Well, I mean, maybe he's taking it from the perspective of, oh, he's the football player, he got his contract, he's not hungry anymore to make that tackle or to practice or do the extra reps. Maybe he's coming at it from that.
That could be it.
So.
All right, well, if anybody has any questions or comments, please make sure you leave them in the comment section of the video and also on SoundCloud and iTunes. Jason, before we get out of here, a lot of great news in the Jason Cruz world. So talk about what's going on with you. Tell people where they can follow you, where you can be read, where you can be heard, and give them the big news.
Oh, MMA Payout. That's where I am. MMApayout.com, at MMA Payout. You can follow me on Twitter at Dilettante. Just put in my name and just see what that is. Good, big news in 2020. You'll be, if you always wanted to hear or read about the legal historical perspective of mixed martial arts, covering the full gamut of controversies from back to when BJ Penn, the origins of the Champions Clause and BJ Penn, to the current UFC antitrust case, to USADA, to UFC sues New York. All of these things I write about in a book that's coming out in 2020. I have a title, but I'm not going to reveal it because I totally, the publisher told me to, we're working on a couple, we're working on it. So anyway, you just follow me for more updates about it. But I'm pretty happy about it. Hopefully not a lot of big legal things happen in the near future, aside from the antitrust case, because then I'd have to do some rewrites. But that's coming in 2020. Just keep up to date. I'll be back. Hopefully I'll be back on with you, John. I haven't worn out my welcome to promote it even more.
Never. There you have it, that, guys. That's the great Jason Cruz. Again, look for all his stuff in the future. You can follow him at Dilettante. You can read him MMApayout.com. And, of course, listen to Show Money. That does it for this episode.
Yeah. Show Money. Yeah, I forgot I'm on that show, too.
Great. That's a great show, guys, really. Jason, one thing I will say about Jason, I've been complimentary of him forever since I've known him, but he always associates himself with good work. So if you follow him or you listen to him or you read him, you know you're getting quality MMA work. So great job.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Great job by Jason. That does it for this week's today's Bum Rush, the special episode performance bonus. And listen to all our podcasts on Cage Side Press Podcast Network. Coming to you, I'll be talking to Mike Strauss soon about the state of Bellator. I'll be talking Sunday morning, a legit Sunday Morning Cornerman. I'm doing it on Sunday morning with Keith Schillen of UFC 236. Plenty to see and hear and listen to and watch on the Cage Side Press Podcast Network. That does it for me, John Franklin. Peace.